here. So even though I'd have loved to have all of you um, on the panel in person, I think, Vinod and Jairaj are better off, um, you know, on second thoughts, changing their mind about coming. But, it makes a big difference. And I'm so grateful to Sridhar, who decided to make it despite the heat in Sonipat. So this is a session we wanted to generally discuss what happens at the state level. I mean, very often, ever since um, uh, when the objectives resolution of our constitution was moved, India was meant to be a very federal polity with very minimal powers to the central government and almost all powers residually going to the states. But the moment partition was announced, that objectives resolution that Jawaharlal Nehru moved was turned on its head, and the Constituent Assembly's mood changed, and it became a Constituent Assembly that favored a very strong center, to the extent that even the boundaries of states in India can be altered by a simple majority of parliament. It doesn't need a special majority of two-thirds the members. And so we've lived with a very centralized system in a sense. But over time, the rise of regional parties has enabled the infusion of some degree of federalism and states asserting their rights vis-a-vis the government in New Delhi. And after the elections that just happened, we can see that at least a couple of states from where members of parliament will have to lend support to the BJP that hasn't got a majority, will in fact be able to assert themselves a little more than they could when there was only one party with a majority in parliament. That said, I think the even with the respect to the three lists in the constitution, the union list, the state list, and the concurrent list. The concurrent list has been slowly, through amendments, expanded. Higher education is in the concurrent list. Land acquisition is in the concurrent list, where both the union, parliament, and states can legislate. So the kind of policy space for states has been diminished, and at least not as much as there ought to be in a truly federal polity. I mean, so India has been described as federal in theory, but unitary in practice. And so we wanted to take up this issue. And even with respect to the judiciary, we have a very centralized judiciary, the Supreme Court and the High Courts, and they have supervisory role over district judges. So the judiciary is unified; it is not federal, and therefore there's a tendency among scholars and academia to study the top level of decision making. So the central government and its decisions and policies get a lot of attention. The Supreme Court of India gets a lot of attention among legal scholars, and to a much less extent, the high courts, and hardly ever are the district courts studied. So these are the sort of the broad scenario of governance in our country. So we thought we'll have a panel of persons who would provide, at some of them at least, firsthand, having worked in a state. That's Jairaj, Sridhar Pabisetti, and Vinod Vyasalu have a very close and in-depth knowledge of Karnataka and, of course, some other states. We are very pleased to have Subodh Mathur, because he's been, although he's far away in Washington and we didn't expect him to travel from there to brave the heat here, but we're very grateful that he's joined us online. I don't know what time it is, Subodh, for you, but it must be some odd, unearthly hour that you've joined. But we are particularly grateful to him because he's been encouraging young persons to voice their views and opinions on a YouTube channel. And one of our students did that. And that was a very pleasant surprise to me Surprised not just that Subodh invited her in the first place, but that how articulate she was on the program. So it kind of makes you feel good when a student there is alongside Subodh, who has a very large following on the internet, and has published very interesting ideas of a kind of iconoclastic economics that we need, with the standard conventional economics haven't taken the beating that it has. So that's our panel. So I'd like to start off with Jairaj for an initial set of reflections, and the idea is that after we've addressed some of these challenges of policy making at the state level, we'll have a little dialogue with the audience, and then there'll be a last set of comments on the part of the panelists, both in response to comments or questions that we may have for them. So Jairaj, over to you, about 10 minutes.
Can't hear you, Jairaj. Good evening. Thank you, Dean Sudarshan.
Yes.
It's a great pleasure to be here, and many thanks for your kind invitation. It's a great pleasure to see Subodh Mathur after all these years, and my friend Vinod Vyasudu as well as Sridhar. Before I start, Dean, I wanted to congratulate you and the School of Public Policy on the excellent conference you got up. I've been listening to the various sessions off and on, and I'm impressed not only by the width of the subjects that have been brought out, but also by the high quality of the speakers and presenters. And I think there's ample material for all of us to reflect on in terms of public policy and economics. So congratulations to you on that initiative. You mentioned about the state, center, and concurrent lists. Before I delve into it, I wanted to tell all of you that mine is a kind of a public, a practitioner's perspective in public policy, because I have been involved in actual administration and governance for more than 3 decades as a member of the Indian Administrative Service, and working essentially in Karnataka, and partly in Delhi, and then in the United States. I want to begin by saying that, these lists that distribute responsibility are now loaded in such a fashion that the state responsibilities have almost become residual in nature. And I would like constitutional experts to pick it up if they wish and dissect it a little more. But on to the actual policy making, the first observation I want to make is, in the context of many states today, policy making of the kind we know it has been replaced by guarantees. Because these guarantees ensure quick delivery, they have tangible reliefs for the section of the public to whom they are intended, and above all, they can garner a lot of goodwill for the government of the day, hopefully translating into votes. Although the last statement has not been borne out in some states in the recent elections, but replacement of guarantee by serious policy making and policy formulation is something that stares us in the face today in most states. And this seems to be also a model that has been picked up by the central government, in the Prime Minister announcing his own guarantees to the electorate. But there are a number of structural reasons why policy making is actually very much cramped at the state level. There are severe constraints at the state level that limit the scope for policy making at the state level. I will bring out 3 reasons, and I'm sure the other panelists will add to them and will have their own views on it. The first is that the major economic and social programs that are today witnessed in India, such as the Employment Guarantee Scheme or Ayushman Bharat or the sanitation programs, and so on, they are all centrally formulated and they receive substantial central funding. So, in terms of policy making at this level, the scope of the state becomes severely restricted. I was associated when I was in Karnataka with the first batch of the Rural Landless Employment Guarantee Program, and more or less, the policy was given from the center. Everything except the minimum wage, which had to be according to state law, everything else was actually fixed. So the scope to change anything was indeed very limited. The second reason why there seems to be a kind of a reduction in policy making scope at the state level is that for most states, the revenue resources are very limited. And if they exist at all, they are highly inelastic. So as a result, the government of the day is very constrained in terms of finding resources for any good program that it may like to launch after thinking it through and bringing out a set of do's and don'ts or standard operating procedures or policies. So as a result, what happens at the state level is that the budgets of the day see a repetition of whatever was done in the past, and the scope for policy formulation of a kind that is innovative, that is required by the requirements of the day, those seems to be very limited. Even when the state government has, let us say, the autonomy to make policy, my own experience is that it has been completely driven by populism. I'll give you an example, and I think my friend Sridhar would also bear me out on this. Many years ago, when a new government came to office in Karnataka, the chief minister, I was energy secretary, called me and said, well, immediately formulate a cabinet note to the government, to the cabinet and then to the legislature about free power for agriculture, up to 10 horsepower. Agricultural consumption in Karnataka then amounted to about 40 to 45% of total power consumption, and up to 10 horsepower nearly accounted for about 95% of the power consumed in agriculture. So essentially, the government of the day was giving away power free to about 40% or 42% of the power distributed. So I mildly protested and said that, it is very bad policy to give free power. Instead, you could, subsidize power to some extent. You could issue vouchers. You could do a variety of things by which, we can moderate the distribution of free power among the beneficiaries, to which the government was absolutely passive and unconcerned. In fact, the chief minister said, not only will we give free power, but we will also not meter that power, as well as have any pump sets which have meters. Because the second suggestion we made was, let us meter the power, and although power is free, we can, find out how much is the actual consumption and distribute according to that. And that's what happened, that finally power was given free, and it is still being given free without any metering. And actually the amount of power that is consumed is anybody's guess, because Sridhar will tell you, the accounting that is followed is a very ingenious kind of accounting. And so there's only guess estimate about the power that is distributed in agriculture. So populism rules, and free power, which is given today for agriculture. And now that has been extended not just to agriculture, but the government of the day last year said 200 units of power is being given free across the board, whether it's an urban or rural area. And that's what has now come to dominate the scene. Apart from these structural reasons, there are some capacity constraints also that inhibit good policy making at the state level. I'll not go deep into this subject because I think it merits another discussion. But to give you one example, years ago, I was commissioner of Bangalore Municipal Corporation, what is called BBMP, and I was horrified to find that in the entire BBMP arena, there was not one urban planner. And therefore, the kind of spatial planning that is required for Bangalore was absolutely absent. What was being done was that building plans were scrutinized and placed for sanction by the town planning department. But it had nothing to do with the sites and services approach or requirements that are required for a good urban settlement. And so, this kind of capacity constraint, which is not just in the kind of organization I told you, but across the board, seems to be an endemic issue in state governments, and therefore it constitutes a major challenge for policy making at the state level. So, the way out is what governments have come to adopt today at the state level, that the convenient thing to do is to say, let us have public private partnerships. Public private partnerships are considered as panacea for all problems that are being faced at the state level, and the government wants to marry its hold over that subject with private sector resources and private sector management in the hope that it will fructify and make a difference to the state. These are some of the initial comments I wanted to make. I also want to end these remarks by saying that the scope for rational decision making, I underline the term rational decision making, of the kind that is data driven or based on economics, I have found that scope is very limited at the state level. As I said, most of what is being done by way of policy formulation is a residual approach, and it's a repetition of schemes over and over. There are many examples that one can give. One is the old age pension scheme, which continues year after year. The second, till the government changed it by 200 units of power, was the Bhagya Jyoti scheme, by which they gave power to the reserved category in rural areas and so on. So that is an important point to bear in mind, that when we look at about economics and the scope for data-driven approach to policy making, that seems to be severely limited at the state level. And if what applies to Karnataka is what I'm speaking about, and Karnataka is one of the more progressive states in India, think about the others that are far behind and how much more constrained they are in terms of policy making. So, those are some of the remarks I wanted to make, Dean Sudarshan. Over to you now.
Thank you very much, Raj. That's very, very, very clear, to the point. We'll pick it up, some of the issues that you've raised. Now, I want to say that I'm going to invite Subodh after the other two, Vinod and Sridhar, have spoken, because he has the advantage of a critical distance, literally and metaphorically, on the theme. And so I'd invite next Sridhar, because I mean, Vinod is an old colleague. We consider him still a part of JSGP, fondly remembered by many of us, and our alumni students. We know who he's endeared himself to them. And the more our alumni get involved in our activities, the more we hear good things about their time being taught by Vinod. So he'll come after Sridhar. Sridhar and I have had the chance to spend a good deal of time here on campus between sessions and so on. And I've learned a lot from him in conversations. But for the benefit of the conference, it's your turn now, Sridhar, for your reflections.
Thank you, Dean Sudarshan, for such a wonderful panel. It's a delight to speak along with dear mentors who have shared so generously over the last 2 decades their experiences whenever I've reached out to them for insights. Both Jairaj and Vinod have been extremely generous. And it was also a pleasure to connect with Subodh recently, and we are yet to take that conversation forward. I'll begin by kind of mixing two worlds that I live in. One is as a practitioner, the other as a uh, practitioner turned academician. And with that, what I would like to draw is for us, there is clarity, and at the same time, there is no clarity when we want to get into the implementation details. All of us have some sense of where we will be as an economy by 2075. But what does it translate to implementing at the state level? Today, many states are having a 5-year plan of being X trillion economy, 1 trillion economy, half a trillion economy. But then where are the details? Are they able to sectorally analyze and go towards an action plan of execution? And I think that's where this whole panel is positioned to say, it's great to think nationally, but how do you execute at the state level and then also at the next level of governance, which is the local bodies? I would like to request all of you here to think of a 16 to 20-year-old that you know and ask a simple question. If she or he could move over the next 3-4 year period, where would she like to be in? Or he like to be in? Let the thought linger. Because no matter what we want to do, the mobile, smart, intelligent youth are making those decisions. One is a set of people, as Ratin was yesterday saying, that get out of India. There's nothing much left for you here. So there are some bunch of people who are going out of India. And we were trying to recently enumerate which are the likely destinations for people to go in. And the obvious choices were Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Pune. And probably that's where the list ended. These are becoming almost like the 6 magnets where the youth are getting drawn into. And beyond that, there is very, very less interest for the mobile youngsters to go into. And we should think about this as a policy challenge, of a governing challenge. And how will you expand capacities? How will you make these cities livable? How do you make these cities thriving? Right? And otherwise, you will just keep saying the same old joke that we say in Bengaluru, that overnight Bangalore became a big city. No, no city becomes big city overnight. Somebody goes and takes a plan approval, somebody goes and takes a water approval, somebody goes and takes a electricity approval. And after that, a building comes up, and then a dwelling comes up, right? So somebody chose not to count up and say, oh, you know what, we have doubled our population in the last 10, 20, 30 years. And then somebody came up with a cop out of saying that, oh, we grew overnight. So it's essential that we start looking at these trends, and probably now is a good time for us to go back and do the long pending census nationally. And just kind of spending a time on what has already been said by Mr. Jairaj of the state list, the central, the union list, and the concurrent list, and how we have a challenge of saying whose responsibility and who will execute it and who will take the credit for it. So now the question comes, any morning you can kind of ask a question telling, will a bachelor's degree be of 3 years or 4 years, right? And this is a national policy, and the national policy seems to be like a choice that is changing. And what happens to the global image of institutions? Because institutions would want to work with a set of partner institutions around the world. And every few years or every 5 years, they'll come back and say, hey, you know what? Now we are switching back to 4 years. Oh, no, we are coming back to 3 years. And if the state gets lucky, they may have elections for more than once in 5 years, right? And the complex web of accreditation agencies, right? And, the IITs are regulated in one way. The IIMs are regulated in one way. The NIDs are regulated in another way. And then the private institutions are regulated in another way. The deemed universities are regulated in another way. Now, they don't want to listen to the other one. They say, when we give a best practice from that other system and say that, hey, you know what, they are offering this course, we would like to offer the same nomenclature. They're like, nahi, nahi, wo alag hai, par aapke liye rules alag hai, right? So how do we kind of come out of this fragmentation and how do we govern together? And who has track of the changes that are happening, right? I just want to share an Excel sheet that a few of my RAs worked with me for about a week or so. And we started to understand how do you understand uh, the NEP implementation and what's changing. This is little dated. Many governments have changed since then, but just give us a second. दोबारा बंद कर दीजिए क्योंकि वो इसमें रहा। Yeah. So we wanted to see what's happening in NEP, right? And there are like so many interesting variations that came out of NEP implementation. The first set of things were, what are the salient features that we wanted to look at? How are the fees regulated in this space? Then, how are you ensuring universal access, quality of education? What are the government decisions? And the National Mission and Foundation Literacy efforts, curriculum and pedagogy. And we kind of started looking at what are these interesting things where you can find variations between state to state. And then once we started plotting, then we realized, okay, there are like so many variations. And by the time you are able to summarize these variations and keep a track of, it's so difficult to manage and become a responsive player in this sector, right? So that's one of the challenges that we looked at. नहीं वो शेयर कर। So that's to just give you an example of saying that take a simple sector like education, where we are all invested in, we all have interest to kind of keep monitoring what's happening in one state or the other. And since we made that slide almost 6-7 months ago, so much has changed in that. So how is regulatory compliance becoming such a big headache? And should states and the center start thinking about it? Now let's look at the resource constraints, right? I mean, we want to do many things. And as Mr. Jairaj said, how much leeway do we have at the state level? Do we have unlimited resources to meet every desire that we have as a state? This is some interesting work that was done by FDR, and Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan kind of shared it at a recent talk where he gave to us. And one of the things is to look at, what is the status of budget? And in many places, current day-to-day expenditure has to be financed by borrowings. So if this is the way our states are existing today, how do you expect them to do Herculean tasks, right? And populism is on one way inching into their coffers, but at the same time, there are other things that need committed pockets of money. And the fundamental golden rule of saying that no economic agent should borrow to finance current consumption. We all know this, right? If even something like microfinance is built on the simple principle that I borrow and I should be able to generate more returns than the cost of capital. And that's when microfinance makes sense, right? So we are getting into these challenges. And just to make it a little more difficult here is the overhang of debt and how much debt is eating into the state's annual budgets. And secondly, this dilly-dallying between old pension scheme and new pension scheme, and to just serve a few handful of bureaucrats, how much of your budget you are willing to commit to service the pension scheme obligations, right? So there are many challenges that are existing on that side. Add to that, you can look at the political instability. The common joke whenever I talk to my students in Pune is saying that, sir, aaj bhi CM wahi hai na, badle nahi hai na, right? So, Maharashtra has seen some very interesting breakaways and new people coming into the CM, the deputy CM, and there is like constant churn that's happening in the political nature of things. The administrative capacity, and this is something that I've seen across states, where the senior bureaucrats, the ministers can understand and appreciate a very detailed inputs that we academic institutions give to them or we practitioners can give to them. Then they would request us to go and work with the teams that they are leading to kind of detail it out. And we know how difficult it is of working with the top brass of the state as compared to the lower brass of the state. It almost becomes like a challenge translating whatever we told the super bosses in a language that the juniors in the machinery understand. The interstate disparities, and that came out pretty well in this recent elections of why some states don't get back enough money from what they contribute to the central kitty. And this is going to be a continuous challenge. And often the response has been that, oh, the well-off should care for the not so well-off. But when the well-off states are struggling to meet legitimate reasons, if the not so well-off states who are getting these extra transfers are splurging on non-necessary items, then that leads to conflict. And that's where the union has to play a better role of trying to make sure that the transfers are justified in a way that all of them understand, right? And finally, the corruption and bureaucratic red tape, which is a huge dampener on most innovative efforts. And finally, as Jairaj mentioned earlier, the data availability and quality. Many times when we look at some program and we kind of go back and say, hey, you know what, if you want to bring in these changes, let's look at what is the current status. And then after 6 months or 12 months, we can come back and see how it has changed. And we find that the understanding of the state administration of how good they know their data just starts unpacking once you start rolling with them, right? And I remember, Jairaj sir, you were talking about the energy department. We tried once to get the power consumption data for looking at some smart metering trials in Bangalore. And that was a wild goose chase, we still remember. And we had to hunt down everybody, including the service provider. And still, we didn't get the data that we wanted. And that's how, even if you want to look at smart metering, how do you roll it out? Do you have enough data to kind of help you make informed decisions? So this was something that I and a couple of my collaborators did for the Karnataka Economic Survey, where we started looking at getting data sets and mapping what has happened over a period of time at the district level, and see how can the departments translate these voluminous data and documents into action plans that can be driven either at the district magistrate level or at the state department level. And we worked with almost 50, 60 indicators, and we were able to generate these reports, which helped the state departments to appreciate the otherwise stale reports into actionable reports. And the academicians are willing to do this kind of work, but often a whole lot of effort goes into the data gathering, data cleansing phases of engagement with the government. So what do we need to think through? Just kind of trying to keep the focus back on what can be done. Data should be gathered. Data once gathered by the government subject to limitations of privacy should be more easily shared with relevant stakeholders. That will help us improve the decision making in the governments. And this is something that we used very well with Sakala. That was the first time that I got a chance to collaborate with Mr. Jairaj and his wonderful team, where we were able to look at simplification as a strategy to make a good implementation of right to public services. And to this day, Karnataka leads in the right to public services because of us keeping that simplistic, minimalistic, data-led kind of approach. Second is accountability. And there is a misnomer of understanding that accountability is to nail somebody even for bona fide mistakes that people do. It's not about that. It's institutions, states are beyond people. It's about trying to make sure that we become learning organizations and we say, okay, last time we tried something like this, it didn't work out, so let's try something else. So rather than look at it as a penalizing for bona fide mistakes, how do you distinguish between bona fide and bona fide, and then kind of not really punish anybody for bona fide mistakes that they could have done. The third principle is the decentralization approach, right? How can you kind of devolve functions? How can you decentralize decision making? And what we find very interesting is that all the states are up in arms when it comes to fighting with the Finance Commission about devolution of funds. But the same thing does not happen with the third tier of the government, the urban local bodies, the rural local bodies. When they want funds to be transferred to from the State Finance Commission, the states are less interested, right? So how, why, and when will the states approach a similar symmetric approach of what they demand from the union to be the same rules with which they engage with the local bodies? Third is the citizens are almost seen as troublemakers by the government on many occasions. And many times, just ensuring that more and more citizens are involved in the decision making, in the functioning of the government, will actually enhance trust by the citizens. Bangalore is very infamous, where BBMP has been penalized many times by the Karnataka High Court for not constituting the ward committees. Now, how can citizens kind of partner if you don't even fill up what is statutorily given to them? And finally, who will nail the quality of life challenges? And it's very important. These are the how of what we can do to make sure the decision making, the public policy making improves. But essentially, we should also go back and look at the core functions of the state. As somebody earlier said, I think it was Ratin who said we are becoming a compensatory state and we are giving doles instead of doing whatever the state has to be doing. And what should the state be doing? Because these functions, if the state doesn't do, nobody else can do that. Any replacements will be very bad replacements of that, which is the rule of law, right? Today, Pune has become world famous because of a 300-word essay, right? And there is a picture going around where on a car windshield, a guy says, please keep safe distance, even if you can write a 300-word essay, right? So the rule of law has become a big joke, and it's unraveling every single day with how many layers of rule of law has been violated in that Porsche case. The second is public order, justice, basic amenities, infrastructure, education, health, and sustainable development priorities. Today, with the compensatory mechanism, the whole focus comes to saying whether I'll give you a gas cylinder at 500 rupees or at 450 rupees. But nobody is trying to kind of take a bet and engage in a public debate on these essential state functions. And just, I would like to remind, some of you might have seen this favorite slide of mine. Every time an election comes, just look at seeing which of your favorite political parties are even willing to engage on these narratives and how many of them are constructive and progressive players. And probably there lies the answers of how we can solve these problems. Thank you very much, and happy to take questions in the end after other speakers speak.
Thank you, Sridhar. That's very thought-provoking, particularly your last slide where you leave a set of questions to us. I'm going to invite Vinod. Vinod's been a champion of decentralization, despite the the human failure that everybody generally tends to think that decentralization is good, but only up to their level. And Vinod's been a champion for the third tier of government. And so we're talking about state policy. It's like, I recall hearing Krishna Menon once give a talk on India's foreign policy in St. Stephen's College. And he began by saying it's very difficult to talk about something that's non-existent. Um, and uh, and so, hearing this, it looks like if state level policy making is a challenge, and Vinod is a champion of the third tier. What are you to say, Vinod, about it?
Thank you, Dean Sudarshan. It's a pleasure to reconnect with JSGP. I wish I was there, but I got scared of the warm welcome you're offering. Both the speakers before me have talked about the fact that the states have very little funds. I think that is true. It's a fact that they have little funds. It is also true that the points Jairaj made about the lack of capacity is true. In my own understanding, to a large extent, the state government departments have become agencies that implement central government schemes. And since they are one-size-fits-all kind of schemes, you have the strange situation where you go to a district and they say that, look, we'd like to implement, but this is the guideline. Say, what is the guideline? Then they'll say, look, for example, in the employment guarantee, 60% must be wages. But in order to work, people need some equipment. And the cost of that equipment is coming to 42%, which exceeds the guideline, which of course is treated as a law. I say, but why don't you go ahead? Say, no, there'll be an audit objection. It will be treated as corruption. We're not going to do it. The net result is that there is a scheme, but it cannot be implemented for reasons of this sort. I looked at district accounts many years ago. And of course, I was told that whatever you want to do, there is no money for it. But when we looked at what was actually sent to the district in departments like education, department health, forestry, and so on, we also found that at the end of the year, the expenditures were below the amount. In other words, they're what is called unspent balances. And the reason for this was that the money would come in February, and there was no way in which the money that came in could be spent in the time available in the rest of the financial year. That's one reason. There are others. So there are some genuine issues that we have to confront. I want to look at this issue of finances. If you want to work with state governments, they need money. Right now, that money comes from central schemes. But the Constitution has given lists that Dean Sudarshan mentioned. If you look at the union list, there have been estimates made by many scholars that for the union government to fulfill its responsibilities adequately, it requires about 1/3 of the divisible pool. Let's say 35%. In order to do all that it is supposed to do according to the union list in the Constitution. Add another 5% to it to deal with emergencies, disasters, etc., 40%. Now, when you look at the actual awards by the Finance Commission over the years, we are now at the 16th Finance Commission. The union has consistently got more than 50%. In the early years, this was understandable. Certainly when I was in the Delhi School of Economics and we were studying plan models and things like that, in our minds, India was one country. It was a unitary country. And if the government was to invest in public sector greenfield plants like BHEL, HMT, Bharat Electronics, SAIL, ONGC, and so on, money was needed. So there was a need, and this money was invested in these companies. It was done. But what happened later? The last public sector unit that was set up was NALCO in 1969. Now, the extra money after meeting its expenses that came to the states, what do they do with it? Incidentally, I should mention here that one of the reasons that extra money was given to the center in the second and third 5-year plans was because what was due to India in the form of sterling balances from Britain, it did not come. Britain just defaulted. So as a result of that, in order not to derail the plan, you had to find resources. And this was at the cost of the states. Now, I was talking about the 1980s, when no new public sector plans were coming, but through sheer force of habit, the finance commissions were giving the union the greater share. This translated itself into central schemes. And of course, the Prime Minister, like Mrs. Gandhi, realized the power this could give her over the states. So the sort of quasi-federal system began to become much more centralized from the 80s onwards. Now, there was an interesting experiment in Karnataka when Ramakrishna Hegde was the chief minister, where a Panchayati Raj Act was passed in 83, it was implemented in 85. And this act was an interesting one because for the first time introduced reservation for women, 25%, and it brought in the concept of a state finance commission, which would decide how the money in the state level was to be distributed across districts and departments. Evaluations of that showed that it worked extremely well. It was a system in which the elected district parishads functioned as they didn't have legislative power, but they functioned as councils which would discuss issues and supervise and monitor projects. I think Jairaj will remember this extremely well. This was later given up when we had the strange situation of the Congress government led by Narasimha Rao pushing through the 73rd and 74th amendments with many elements of the Karnataka law in it. But the Karnataka Congress government in Karnataka repealing the law and becoming much more rigid. If these states have to function, we have to reverse the vertical devolution that has been the norm so far. If the union requires a third, give them 40%, let 60% be divided across the states instead of the 42% that is currently given. And I'm not even talking about the surcharges, etc., which are not shared. So this would improve the financial status of the states. Then comes the question of how the states can work. Now, in spite of all the constraints, there are many states that have done some excellent work in many sectors. Look at Kerala's work in health. There's been a great deal of work that's been done in states like Madhya Pradesh on primary education. In every state, you will find some innovative things that with all the constraints and so on have been done. And this is because when governments are elected, they want to do something which will get them re-elected. It may not be across the board, but in most cases, there will be areas where you can be proud of what has been done. Karnataka has had several such examples which have been held out to other states as models to follow. So if the vertical devolution quantity increases, then how do the states function? I think what is sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. So it is also up to the states to deepen federalism. I've come to dislike the term decentralization. In decentralization, a decision that was originally taken by a department in the state capital is passed on to the chief executive officer of the district. That's a decentralization, administratively speaking. I'm talking of a political federal structure in which the elected body is involved and the civil service at the lower level functions under it, is monitored by it. This is something that the current law permits, but it has not been tried. To some extent, it happens in Kerala, where the elected Gram Panchayats are powerful and get their way done. But that is because of the power dynamics rather than anything else. So I would argue that more funds devolve to local governments which are legitimate, but which are strengthened from the way in which they function. Jairaj has been commissioner of the BBMP. In the BBMP, the commissioner can overrule a resolution of the elected body. And this is from the British era. Today, we have a new law in which the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi can override what the elected Chief Minister does. So this is a political struggle which has to continue. And in my view, if you want certain developments at the local level, you want to see innovative projects and not one-size-fits-all schemes, then the federalism enabled by the 73rd and 74th Amendments should percolate downwards, and the state should, for example, create an inter-district council or whatever things they like to do in order to do this. And a final point, till now, the union government has been acting as an intermediary between states. If Karnataka and Tamil Nadu have an issue, they go to the union, which acts as some kind of arbitrator or judge or whatever. I think the time has come when states talk much more to each other. I'll end with just one example. Southern states like Karnataka have a huge influx of migrant workers who come from Orissa, West Bengal, Bihar, UP. Now, these people miss out on things. For example, they cannot vote locally. They have to go back to their hometowns. I'm not very sure if they can get all the benefits of, free food, this, that, and the other. We've been talking about one nation, one ration card, but I'm not sure how well that works. But if Karnataka could talk to the states from which these people come directly, then the welfare of these workers, their fundamental rights can be much better protected. So how this is to be done is something I don't know. This is an area in which we have to do it. But just like the states have a Bhavan in Delhi, they could have a Bhavan in each other states, so that this kind of issue can be dealt with. And the union need not necessarily come into these which are essentially by that conditions. I want to stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vinod. Your last point is a serious idea. And I think that's implementable. I mean, it doesn't cost money to do what you just remarked. Also in our federal structure, we've been what you might call asymmetric in the nature of federalism. For instance, the Gorkha land agitation was resolved by letting the Gorkhas have a building in Kolkata, which is called Gorkha House. And the prominent people from Gorkha land can come and stay there and have the hospitality of the West Bengal government. And they were appeased, and they have their own kind of sense of it. Now, many of the rooms in that Gorkha land house is used by the West Bengal University of Juridical Sciences for visiting professors, and that's how I know about it. So it's possible to have representation of states in other states in the structures that we've evolved. So I'm going to turn to Subodh, having heard what he has so far, to give us his views and responses.
Mute.
Thank you, Dean. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I take it seriously, what you said. Actually, I'm not going to comment on what others have said. I understand and I know well the issue of constraints in terms of revenue, in terms of administration, and so on. I'm going to float some ideas that have been in my head for many years, looking at the whole issue not from a constitutional or an administrative perspective, but from purely first principles as an economist. And the first point I would like to make is to add to the debate rather than to comment on the existing ongoing debate. The first point I would like to make is that when we talk about states, there's too much focus on schemes. Policies are not schemes. It's a very important point. Policies are of two types. And the one type that I want to mention first has been largely ignored in the public discussion, though not by the chief ministers themselves. And those are facilitative catalytic policies. You don't spend money, you facilitate. Now, Mr. Gerard mentioned public-private partnership. That's a kind of a facilitative policy. But public-private partnership, as we know, developed for infrastructure, is essentially now last century's innovation and is not going to be very helpful for progress. And the second point I want to make is that we want to think not of the state-led model of economic progress, which I think we all grew up with, but rather the investment-driven model. And that investment is private. And so what I'm saying is that we need facilitative catalytic policies to raise the investment level in each state. Overall, India's investment level as a share of GDP is far below what China had in its boom time. And it's below what India had in the past. And part of the reason is that the state's facilitative and catalytic policies are missing. So we need to focus on those policies that don't require expenditure. And there are a lot of young people in India today with a lot of energy. So let's look at two sectors that are pretty much within the control of the chief ministers: agriculture and schools. Most states run lousy schools. And that's not because of money alone. That's because, I mean, look, you can go through the details of Acer and so on, and you can cry. But the states aren't running good schools, and that's really not the responsibility of the prime minister. It's really the responsibility of the chief ministers, and they can run better schools. We have a problem in agriculture, 40% of the labor force producing 15% or so of the GDP. Now, agriculture is there, and we have an agriculture ministry, but really the responsibility is of the chief ministers. I talk to for-profit people interested in agriculture. I talk to non-profit people interested in agriculture, and none of them feel welcome in any state. None of them. We have agri-tech coming from for-profit people. The latest technologies, not for growing crops, but for risk-taking, risk avoidance, and so on. We have people who want to go in and make agriculture physically more sustainable. But the states don't welcome any of this. This is of no cost. There's no issue of it. So we need, I think the first point I want to make is that when we talk of policy, we shouldn't think of schemes only. We should think of facilitative and catalytic policies, of which the states are. Now, one additional point is that the 1991 economic reforms actually created economic space for the chief ministers. This is a point that very few people make in public, that was actually the liberation for the chief ministers. The investment decisions were no longer being made by the union government. And the result we see that FDI goes to a few states only. Why do they go to those few states? Because those few states have taken the measures to facilitate and catalyze those investments, to give them a good reception. They go there. So it's really not right to only focus on the limited resources. It's right, but it's also very important to look at the lack of facilitative and catalytic options and policies. There's a lot of excitement among young Indians. I can tell you, I've talked to 500, I've listened to 500 of them. Lot of excitement. You mentioned the young person from Jindal. There are young people everywhere. They want to do things. Nobody is interested in tapping them. I'm trying to tap them by setting up my own non-profit organization, which the name's already been approved and we'll have a Section 8 company. But the governments aren't listening to these people. And there's lots of money and lots of innovation that can be done without resources. We are not living in the India of the 1960s and 1970s. We are living in a tech-savvy India where there's a lot of money available, a lot of energy, and each state can tap it. Now, of course, since 1991, several chief ministers have tapped it. Hyderabad and Cyberabad came in not because of any union government policy. It was because of the policies of a particular person who's now coming back into power. But we have had the decline of Kolkata. It's not because the union government declined them anything. No, when you said, where do people want to go to? Nobody wants to go to Kolkata. I know because I talk to people there too. People want to leave. We have ghost villages in Kumaon. People have left. Why? Because the freedom is there. We have a national market. People can leave and they're voting with their feet. And the investors are voting with their feet and nobody is going to Kolkata. Why? Because you haven't set up the facilitative and catalytic policy. So the states, now in my book on India 2047, I classified the big states. There are 7 A states in India, the 5 South Indian, plus Maharashtra and Gujarat. They didn't become A states because they were favored by the union government. And they didn't become A states because they had all the natural resources and all the educational institutions that were set up since 1950s. No, they have done well because they have catalytic and facilitative policies. Now, sometimes there is a conflict between the chief ministers and the large city that is driving the economy. Example, in Karnataka, there is resentment of the dominance of Bangalore or Bengaluru, and there's problems with Andhra and Telangana with the dominance of Hyderabad. But still, we must not be only thinking about the revenue. We must be thinking about the catalytic and facilitative policies that we as policymakers can propose to the state governments and say, listen, do this. It doesn't cost you money. It's doable. Okay. Then when it comes to the expenditures, many of the states do a very lousy job. I mean, as I said, they run lousy schools. They're wasting their money. Many of the schemes are not designed to give you the biggest bang for the buck. So we need to go in as policymakers, and now we're talking about nitty-gritty policy, which is nitty-gritty schemes, which are outside my area of expertise. How can they do a better job of moving of the resources better? Of course, we also need to think of what I call as the emergence of the subsidy Raj, what people call as guarantees. Karnataka, of course, leader in subsidy Raj, Delhi too, that you are putting too many of your resources in the short run of ameliorating or improving the quality of life of certain people against the long run progress. Now, there has to be some kind of a debate about this. What share of the budget of the state or of the union can go to subsidies? Subsidy Raj must have a cap. Instead of saying this subsidy is good, that subsidy is bad, we need a cap that, look, just as we have so many caps in the political arena, that you can have only so many ministers, only so many people can defect if they defect together. We need, and there's a budget deficit cap, we need a subsidy cap, which is simply saying, listen, subsidies or freebies cannot exceed X% of your budget. That has to be implemented. If the union government doesn't want to have such a law, let the state make a policy. Let each state say, listen, I'm not going to give more than X% of my budget as subsidies. Nobody prevents you from doing that. We don't need a law from the union government. So the focus still remains on the union government making the laws, even when there is no law. What we need are to realize that most of our states are larger than most countries in population. And if we can make laws working, say, for the World Bank, for those countries, each state has its own power to do things, yes, under the control of unfair federal distribution of resources, fight that on the one hand. On the other hand, and the more important hand, which has not yet been discussed much in public, there's a whole lot more you can do with the resources and with other people's resources. Let the NGOs come in and do stuff. Let them improve. I mean, Pratham is sitting on the sidelines. Pratham is a top-ranked NGO, but Pratham's too scared to do anything in schools. We have Teach for India, not willing to get into the nitty-gritty because the government guards its schools too much, doesn't let innovation come in, doesn't let health innovation come in. Open up the state governments to innovation, catalytic, facilitative policies. So that's my message. Last point on the youth. I have been lucky enough to come up with a scheme in which I listen to the educated young people in India. And let me tell you, they are world class. We just don't give them an opportunity to speak. And I decided on a personal basis to bring about the change and to create a platform in which they would speak. And they validated my hunch that they are really very good. We need to give them more power. We need to give them more authority to do things. So let me end there. Thank you very much, Dean, for inviting me. And it's so good to listen to Vinod. I agree with him, though he didn't say it, that the Panchayati Raj institutions must do better. We should help them do better because as far as I can tell, across India, they do very little. This is a sad state of affairs, and we must delegate some authority to large cities. They are controlled by the chief ministers, and that is just like the center-state relationship. At the one level, it is the large city administration and the chief minister. I mean, Bengaluru shown to be just fully run by the chief minister of Karnataka, nor should Hyderabad, though I don't know which chief minister they belong to. Still, they belong to both. But this has to end. They need to have more space. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinod Subodh, for this excellent observations. You've got a round of applause. And from the young people here, you're such a champion for the young. So I'm going to open the floor for some comments and questions. We've got about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Pratik, get hold of a mic. Quick line of introduction.
So I'm Pratik. I work in Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. My question was about the one word that I wanted to listen or hear from you was governance, because you talked about catalytic and facilitative policy, Professor Subodh Mathur. And also I was hearing Jairaj sir speaking about public-private partnerships. And I thought that he was not welcoming of this model of public-private partnership. So my question was about whether presently the state governments are not welcoming to this idea of so-called governance, where civil society organizations, government and private players come together to achieve something or to get things done. So am I right in understanding that this type of governance is not taking place in any of the states? And I remember Chhattisgarh's example in 2010, when in health sector, basically, State Health Resource Center was there, and they were so welcoming of civil society organizations and their participation in health sector, like implementation of schemes and all. So that is my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Please make a note of these comments, because in the last round, you can pick up whatever you wish to respond to as each member of the panel. So others, I thought you were going to say, Pratik, that in 2014, a slogan that we heard a lot of simply disappeared. That was minimum government, maximum governance. That's no longer heard. Any other? There are some people online as well, I think, that we could pick up, but I'm just looking at the audience present in this. So Naresh, over to you.
Just a question to to all the panelists, and that is on the role of schools of government and public policy in India. So, especially to Subodh, he has really outlined some innovative thinking. And listening to him, I wondered whether universities are part of the problem or whether, in fact, they are potentially part of the solution, but they don't seem to be, at this point, a part of the solution. So I'd like feedback from the panelists generally on the role of schools of government and public policy on the question before the panel, and especially for Subodh, how can universities, schools of government and public policy, particular, help with your ideas, if at all?
Thank you. Chandan, I thought you, no, I thought you were going to say something. You're all right? Okay. Sudeep.
Thank you very much. So this is also something I'm also learning very much. So I would very much like to know about what are your thoughts about promoting the culture of innovation? Because you see that all of you, I think you have emphasized on innovation. And, even going back to some alternative economic models, like if I'm not wrong, Romer and others, they have suggested that say how Silicon Valley was created in United States, that is not based on any planning or something like top-down approach, but rather more like community-based interactions through which innovation came up. So mainly scientists and engineers. So whether that kind of thing can be more and more promoted in Indian states and how that can happen.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just trying to figure out how to see if there's some comment on chat. Any questions over there? Can you just to make sure people online, I know there's a student of the online MA Public Policy who's been listening to the proceedings of this conference quietly and every session. So I wonder if Patrick, you have a comment or question?
Yes, sir. First, this has been a tremendous conference. I'm extremely impressed with the papers that have been presented and the ideas that, as a citizen of the United States, and also as Mr. Mather pointed out, an age-adjusted citizen of the United States, I recognize that times are changing rapidly, and being able to listen to what's taking place in India as far as governance, education, public policy, all these things give me hope that we can also change here again in the United States, that we don't have to stay in these ruts. So the questions of governance versus government, the ideas of public policy and government schools having a better role in what takes place are all extremely important questions that I'm really looking forward to hearing from. I want to know more what these practitioners can hopefully provide some future for us.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. That's very encouraging. It's a pleasure having you in class and live sessions. And it's been with the online program. It's always been mutual learning every time you make observation, and also because it's a diverse and international group that enhances the benefit of learning for everyone. So thank you for having followed our conference. I don't see any other comments from the online. So I'll now hand over to the panelists in, I think in the same order in which we started.
Yeah.
To react to some observations that we've made.
Thank you, Dean, and I will respond to each of the observations made. The first was by Pratik on governance. I want to say, Dean, that I'm familiar with the South Indian states much more than the North, but 2024 has marked a profound change in the way the state governments have looked and understood their responsibilities. And it's important for us to understand what this is. Today, the compulsions of electoral politics have completely dominated the psyche of politicians in the southern states. I leave others to judge what is the situation in the north. And so, therefore, guarantees, quick fix measures, reaching out to particular sections of the public, announcing SOPs and other measures for them, that really is the order of the day, and it will continue to be the order of the day. Just to give you an example, Karnataka has 5 guarantees. I won't go into each one of them, but these guarantees together take up about 75,000 crores of rupees. And it's anybody's question as to how the state, with its limited resources, is going to meet the guarantees. So, all the talk about governance being, delivery of public services in a harmonious manner, corruption-free government, not much friction between the elected politicians and the bureaucracy. That kind of thing has completely changed today, and this trend is going to be accentuated in the future. That's my response to what Pratik had to say about governance. And also, Pratik, I'm a votary of public-private partnerships. In fact, thanks to Dean Sudarshan, I spoke about it in Jindal a couple of weeks ago. So I think it's at least an effective way of resolving some outstanding issues that are being faced by our society. Now, regarding Naresh, schools of public policy, what impact they have, although that question may have been reserved for Subodh, I would like to say that there is no serious impact that these schools of public policy have on the functioning of state governments, on the formulation of policy, or even on the way things can be thought of differently, except when you have right-thinking politicians at the state level who are willing to take it up and bring about some changes. So it's more personality-centered than institutional-centered. So we made a beginning many years ago by having an interaction between the Indian Institute of Management and the state government in Karnataka when it was newly constituted. And we made the professors of IIM speak to our elected leaders about what good, sensible, sound policy can be. Some of them picked it up, but overall, the impact it makes, in my opinion, is quite limited. I'll, of course, be looking eagerly for Vinod to join in this conversation with his valuable views. Then on innovation, I think the question raised by Sudeep, earlier when it started, I'm talking of Karnataka, the feeling was that innovation is autonomous of the government. For instance, the IT sector in Karnataka largely started because of private sector entrepreneurship by Narayan Murthy and Azim Premji and others, and it was picked up by, although the infrastructure for the IT in the form of hardware parks was owing to the ingenuity of the government of India and the late N. Vittal, whom we must credit as being the architect of the IT revolution in India, a forgotten man today. But that apart, today, I find that the state governments are now active in promoting innovation, especially in Karnataka, in terms of creating a good ecosystem for startups, in terms of trying to promote this among the young people by promoting venture funds, by promoting incubation centers. Here, surprisingly, the state is taking active interest. And I think my friend Sridhar may like to amplify that, because that is a very positive feature that we notice in Karnataka, also in Tamil Nadu, from what I know, and in Andhra, in Telangana. Those are some of the comments I wanted to make in response to the issues raised by the audience. Dean, thank you.
Thank you. So the next panelist.
Pratik, coming to the governance piece of it, right? And I think I'm accused of being an eternal optimist, and I find hope in unexpected places. For me, in terms of governance, the gold standard has been the midday meal scheme in India. One of the most complex problem of how do you meet the nutritional needs of kids who go to the government schools, right? And in that vacuum was born the Akshay Patra as an innovation scheme. And that's where ISKCON, along with Infosys Foundation, came together and said, what can we do around it, right? Well, they did what they could do in terms of a trilateral arrangement and coming up with a good scale of operations. Not just that, just the way they started operating and setting up a new standard enabled many others to replicate that, right? So that's how you have a social solution that gets replicated and scaled. And today we do a reasonably good job in kind of the midday meal scheme, at least in India, right? And I think that's a good positive story. And there have been also many other challenges. Bangalore has so many experiments that we have done, some which have succeeded, some which we have failed. But nevertheless, this trying to mix together competencies is a good thing for all of us to collectively cultivate and keep trying and documenting the lessons out of it, right? So the Gandhi Fellowship is a good example of how you can look at a complementary role and not just how Teach for India looks at teachers only, right? So all these people are able to operate and do some impact rather than having no impact in the public education system. And much more can be done. But again, as I think Subodh mentioned of the scare or the how clingy government is about the government school administration is something for us to be concerned about. Naresh, on the role of public policy schools in India, when we set up the Kautilya School of Public Policy, as Jairaj mentioned, it could be people-centered, it could be personal dependent. We had invited the Minister for IT, K.T. Ramarao, to the school once. Then he said, how can we partner? How can we do something for you guys? We said, how could our students come and spend time with your departments? The chief secretary came the following month. Then Jayesh Ranjan, who was the IT secretary, came to the school. He taught in my class as a guest lecturer. And then we asked, can we send our students for internship with you? And we were expecting he'll say, send 5 people, send 10 people. He said, Sridhar, send all the 44 people. We will allocate them to different departments. Let them do the 2-month internship. And we thought that's a great thing. We go back to our students. Our students were like, no, sir, hum corporate mein karenge, hum waha karenge. And we had to counsel them and say, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. You're going and sitting in the government machinery. You're going to have the eyes and ears of the principal secretary of a department. If there are something beyond, then we could always kind of reach out to the ministry and then the ministers and then tell what could be done. And we could, that's right, of Kautilya School of Public Policy. So in the inaugural batch, more than half of them ended up doing an internship with the government ministries, right? And a lot of lessons came. Many principal secretaries were very happy with the reports. They wrote recommendation letters. They found them further opportunities to engage and work together. So one thing that I would always urge all public policy students is to turn up at government departments, government offices, take up a problem, come back home, come back and solve it in your classroom. Look at what you have learned in the academic side of things and apply into a problem that bothers you in the local context. This is a methodology that I teach at NID Bangalore as a visiting faculty. And every year they are eagerly looking forward to meet, to come with a set of problems, and then they unpack their design tools and say, okay, Sridhar sir, what can we do with this, right? So I think it's for us to kind of take the trouble of engage with the probably sometimes uninterested government machinery, sometimes interested government machinery, but every learning there is something for a lifetime. And as Jairaj sir mentioned of how IIM Bangalore and Government of Karnataka collaborated, I was extremely fortunate to join, to be part of one such experiment where when I was the CEO of the Center for Public Policy, a letter came to us from government of Karnataka where they said, we are trying to do this right to public services. Why don't you guys come and join us? And then I ended up in the meeting, and then I was concerned of saying that you want to achieve something more, but then you're not prepared enough. And I wrote a long letter to the secretary who invited to me. I thought she'll get pissed off and write a letter to the chairperson, Professor Rajiv Gowda. Thankfully, she replied early in the morning and she said, thank you, Sridhar, for all the valid points. I'm copying my team and they'll respond to you. And they did respond to me. And that's how we ended up becoming the advisors to Government of Karnataka's Right to Public Services scheme called Sakala. And Jairaj was at the helm of the initial days of Sakala. And we've done reasonably well than the rest of the states in the country, right? So all of us have opportunities. It doesn't come dressed up as opportunities. Sometimes it comes dressed up as challenges. But being invested will help us solve that. And in terms of the innovation hub, Sudeep, very, very interesting question. I have been looking at the government regulations much more closely. I have been working with venture capitalists and various others on how do you unlock the Indian solutions, right? One such example is the ONDC, the Open Network for Digital Commerce, which is kind of now taking big steps. I'll give you an instance. There is something called as Namma Yatri, which is built on ONDC platform, which is compliant to ONDC platform, which will give you rickshaw rides in the city of Bengaluru. Right? You can book your auto rickshaw and it will give you, it will match you with the auto driver, no premium charged. The business model is completely antithetical to how Uber and Ola make their money, right? And it works in Bangalore. And last time I'd come back to Pune and I saw something called as O-Rickshaw. And then I realized, okay, there is O-Rickshaw in Pune, which runs on a similar model. I opened up and for the last 1 week, I'm trying to find a rickshaw in Pune and then I'm not getting any rickshaw, right? So there is differences. So India is such a lovely market where you have 100 cities competing with each other. They have 30 states competing with each other. I'm sure if we scale our solutions and then keep experimenting, something or the other will work. And there's a reason why so many startups thrive in Bangalore. That's because there is a primordial broth that kind of encourages innovation in Bangalore like no other city, right? I once heard a unicorn founder and now a investor who said, Sridhar, for whatever solution I want to prototype, I'll try prototype in the Bellandur 1.5 square kilometer radius. I've got the most diverse customer base. If something clicks there, then I know that I can scale it across the country, right? So I'm sure such lovely 1.5 square kilometer areas exist in the country, and we could become the pilot zones for that, right? So it's about us trying out innovation. Will continue in India. There is a whole lot of unlocking of value happening, unlocking of convenience, unlocking of unicorns that's happening, and I'm pretty gung-ho about it. Right?
Thank you. That's a very upbeat note. Vinod, over to you. You have to unmute. We can't hear you, Vinod. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, now. Thank you.
I'll start with Naresh's question about the role of schools of public policy. I think it will take some time for that to emerge. When JSBP was started, it was alone, but now there are very many schools located in different parts of the country and different priorities, different faculty mix, and so on. But there is something that can be done by these schools. For example, JSGP is located in Jagdishpur village and Sonipat district. There are proposals, there are dire need for a district development plan. There is dire need to collate. There's a lot of data in different district departments and offices, but there is no proper data bank. There's no database. I think some of these things can be taken up. And in a way, this is what Subodh is saying. You bring in investment investment doesn't have to be money. It could be skills. And if some of this is done, it will have its own multiplier effect. For example, 30 years ago, I was part of something called the Karnataka Rajya Sahitya Parishad, which was training teachers in different colleges on various modern ideas, what science and what is management, various other things. Now, 2 years ago, I happened to meet some of them in Tumkur district, which is just outside Bangalore. And those college teachers who are now senior citizens had got together and they had made a map of Tumkur district with all water bodies and all the data around water bodies and so on. The sad thing was that while this data was there, nobody was using it. Now, schools of public policy would have the strength, they can further analyze it, give it to the authorities at the local level, try to persuade them. I think in this way, each school in its own area can lead to a lot of local level development. For example, we have midday meals schemes. Why can't the contract for a be given to the local Mahila Mandal, who have done quite a lot of good work on savings and loans and things like that? Why cannot the locally grown vegetables and locally grown millets be acquired and supplied? This would set up a virtuous cycle of economic activity in the locality. And it would reduce its dependence upon supplies of food grains from outside and so on. These are just random thoughts, but I'm throwing these ideas out, which don't require a lot of money and which the kind of resources and skills of schools of public policy can. In fact, they can catalyze the kind of things Subodh is talking about, because investments can come in different ways, but it's essentially ideas and use. And here, that catalytic role can be played by these schools. So I thought that I've learned a lot in this discussion. And yes, there's a lot of potential of mobilizing investments. If local colleges, teachers who are teaching various subjects, commerce, economics, physics, if they can be mobilized to look at problems in their own areas, I think a lot of information will be generated. If this is then disseminated, you can pressure the local elected people into doing something. If you go to a district, they'll say, we have no information. This gap can be filled. It won't be filled for all the districts in the country, but wherever there is such a school, and maybe looking at your examples, other colleges will follow it up. In Karnataka, this has worked through engineering colleges reasonably well. And a lot of work has been done on, for example, on maintenance of hand pumps. Issues of this sort which matter, they're not dramatic, it's not sending a satellite to the moon, but it makes a lot of local difference. And I think we should think at this level by saying, what can I do where I'm located? I'll stop at that point. Thank you. I've learned a lot. Thank you, Sudarshan, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Vinod. Thank you. We must get you over in cooler climes and follow up some of the ideas that you just mentioned. We need more shoulders to the wheel, so to speak, to make these things happen. So I now invite Subodh.
Well, okay, thank you. Let me respond to the questions if I remember them all. The first one on governance. I think we need much better governance at the state level and at the district level than we have. Now, I'm not an expert on it. It's outside my domain. So I'm not going to say that I know how to do it. There are people who are far better equipped than me, and they can do it. On public-private partnerships, they are very good for capital-intensive investments that generate revenue over a long period of time. And since the revenue comes over a long period of time, they're risky. And so there's risk sharing between the private sector and the government, and this is absolutely fine. But if that's not the kind of scheme or project that you have, then it's very hard to think of public-private partnerships there. Okay, so that, I think, second point is on innovation. I think the young people are already innovative. They are not innovative because their colleges are teaching them to be innovative, but because they're learning from the internet, from YouTube, their friends worldwide, they're digitalized, they're worldwide. I talk to many, when I say I talk, I listen to many of them. There's one fellow, I will say from BITS Pilani, second year, he said, "Sir, what do you want? What kind of innovation do you want? My friends and I will give it to you tomorrow." I said, "Look," he said, "don't talk in general things. We'll do it for you. Just tell us, what is it that you want? We'll do it." So they're very confident, very smart, and I see people looking at agriculture, nature-based solutions, not organic, but nature-based solutions, and they're doing things. What is missing, and there was a mention of the venture capital, is the financial system that supports them. The innovation hubs, as Mr. Jairaj mentioned, are there in many government places. The young people are taking advantage of those schemes. They are going to get some. I asked them, "Where do you get the feeder money?" And some of them say, "Sir, I'm sitting in this government-sponsored place." Every state needs to have those. We don't need a union policy. We don't need a law. This is easy, cheap money, and we can do it. And the young people are already taking advantage of that. But the moment they come of certain scale, they have no money, no access, because the financial system in India is antiquated. They talk of digitalization, but that's just digitalization of payments. It's not focused on debt and equity. We need a focus on debt and equity to those who need it. So even there are some debt parts, but there is no way for you or me or anybody else to invest in a startup through some convention, through some channels where our money can go. So I think innovation in India at a scale is hampered by the antiquated financial system that we have. RBI is sitting without recognizing that it is its job to reform the financial system along with the finance ministry. When I wrote my 2047 book, the most important economic recommendation for the union government was to improve the financial system. Nothing much is done. Digitalization is not even scratching the surface. On the issue of what can the schools do of public policy, I think given the explosion of public policy teaching in India, some specialization is called for. That is, you have to have the core curriculum, which is applicable everywhere, but then some specialization. I mean, who are your target beneficiaries? Whom are you aiming at? Are you making public policies for any and all places? Or are you saying, listen, if you want to come here and you want to learn innovation in the aviation sector, we have 2 courses. You want to learn innovation in the banking financial sector, we have 2 courses. So there could be multiple specializations within the school, but there must be some increasingly form of saying, if you want to go into these sectors, or we consult for that. Our professors are those who consult with them. You don't have to take their courses, but we have the expertise. And I would say, looking at it from the point of view of this discussion, we need to say, listen, we are focused, I am focused on B states. B states in India to me are Rajasthan, West Bengal, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, and Assam. They are B because they don't want to be A. The political leaders don't have the guts and the willingness to make the hard decisions to become A states. West Bengal, a clear case of the chief minister not pushing as hard as possible. Rajasthan, another case, chalta hai, chalta hai. So we need to have policies that are easy to understand for the people there so that we can catapult these 5 B states into A states. They are not so far below. So we can say, look, we focus on these states, not by the conventional geographical region of north or south, but by saying, look, I'm in Rajasthan, I'm in Odisha, I'm in West Bengal, because they are economically in a status which requires public policies. Now, they're not going to be economic policies, they're going to be public policies. But that's what I would say, that some kind of feeling that, look, like people have evolved. You want to do chemical engineering, you go to IIT X, right? You want to do metallurgical, then you go to IIT-B. There must be some form of that. Okay. Let me stop here. Let me just say that I've really enjoyed this, and I must say that once more that trust the young people of India. Trust them. I've listened to at least 500 people who are highly educated. I also work with an NGO where we work with people who are equally hardworking and smart, but they're not high income. They've not had a good education. And when you see the motivation and the dedication and the hard work, one fellow said to me, "Sir, I wake up at 6, I go to work at 7, I come back at 6, and at 7 p.m. I'm in your class." Okay, so the young people in India are very good. Trust, we have built them up over time. It's not that we are dummies. The systems that we have built up over time, the schools and the universities and all of that is paying off in the form of young. And every school of public policy should focus on how this talent can be tapped by the governments, which the governments actually are not willing to do. So let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We come to the end of our conference, and this has been an excellent panel. We started off with a talk by Beena Agarwal, and one of the things she referred to in her talk was, why aren't we in India's agriculture adopting very, very easy and simple technology that could make a big difference, particularly in water scarce areas? Why can't you lay a pipe, prick some holes in it, and do drip irrigation? What's stopping it? So we started out with that, and it's nice to come back and at the end of this conference to think again about very many simple innovations that are possible involving a set of people who would, with some passion and commitment, get things going. And so then you get a sort of a flywheel experience after that. But some initial steps would be taken, and we've learned a lot as a school in the course of this conference from all of the people who participated in it. So I'm very, very grateful to all of you. So I have to do a little ceremonial ritual, which we have in our university, which is to give the scarf of the university, but not just hand it over, but the Vice Chancellor coming from Kanyakumari would like it to be draped around the neck of our guests. But all of you are far away. I only have Sridhar here for that honor, and I'm going to do that now with him and thank all of you again and welcome all of you at some point to come to our campus, and we could do some more brainstorming and take things forward. So I'm very, very positive that the outlook is very bright, particularly with young people and people who are young in spirit, like Patrick, who's a student of our school. So we'll get on with all that. So thank you, Subodh, for joining us at an unearthly hour for you. And thank you, Vinod. Thank you, Jairaj. We'll meet up as soon as possible and carry on our conversations. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Dean, thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Subodh, and Vinod. See you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Jared. See you. Bye,
We'll
Subodh.
connect
Bye.
with Patrick. We'll be in touch.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, everybody. I have another meeting to get to. Bye.
Be in touch. Thank you.
So the conference is ended. So there's no more speeches happening. Except, of course, heartfelt thanks to everybody who worked very hard. But we worked since dinner, 7:30. But okay. So I just want to thank everyone who's worked. I mean, many of the participants have done that. Very gracious of them to have thanked all of you who in the organizing committee and behind the scenes so many ways. Thank you again.